I'm Lee Baker, and welcome to this week's edition of Level Up with Lee. We've got a great show planned for you today, and we're going to talk about what I like to think of as kind of the bit of the redhead stepchild of financial planning. It's not uncommon for us to go through the motions when it comes to insuring our stuff. People talk about life insurance, but property and casualty is a really big part of protecting all the things that we've had. So we've got a fantastic guest lined up for us today. Latonya Simmons is going to share a wealth of knowledge with us. Latonya is a native Atlantan. She's a Spelman grad and currently holds the position of vice president for Aon. So with that, welcome aboard, Latonya Simmons.
Well, thanks so much for having me, Lee. I really appreciate it. So as you mentioned, Atlanta native, born and raised, never left, but been in the risk management industry my entire career. And I currently serve as the National Sports Practice Director and the Private Risk Advisor for Aon Private Risk Management. I sit here in the Atlanta office, and throughout my career, my goal really has been to provide expert personal property and casualty insurance advice to successful individuals. So whether that's executives, entrepreneurs, athletes, entertainers, folks nationwide, I really count them among the people that I serve, specializing in designing comprehensive and competitive programs by understanding each client's unique lifestyle and needs, because everybody's different. Their goals are different, and we want to make sure that we are meeting them really where they are. So thanks again for having me.
Let's maybe start there, right? So, as the national sports director for Aon, I know many of us might have ideas of what we think life's like for athletes. But what are some of the similarities and differences when it comes to the insurance needs and the protection needs for, let's call it again, everyday folk versus that of, some of the athletes and coaches and broadcasters that you might work with?
Yeah, I think whether it's sports professionals or those who are accumulating wealth in other industries, one of the things that we've seen in common is that most have their wealth grow over time. And when that happens, they might decide to upgrade their wealth advisor or their CPA, or they definitely want to make sure that they have their wills taken care of. But unfortunately, what we see in all of those groups is that risk and insurance is usually not a topic of conversation that comes top of mind. So for busy, successful families, like your listeners and viewers, we don't really see them having a close relationship with a risk advisor or an agent where they have annual stewardship discussions, where they're planning proactively. We really believe that making sure that insurance affairs are current and change in real time is important for any policy holder. So risk advisors can not only help you with pricing, but they can also right size your program and give you really the tools to make some really informed decisions and be proactive really in the management of your overall wealth. So we really work really as partners with our clients, and we want to make sure that the other advisors are sitting at the table too, and that we're working collaboratively with them. So whether it's sports professionals, coaches, athletes, front office staff, your everyday person, that I think those are some absolute things that we see in common in terms of risk and how they view or maybe don't view risk.
So when you talk about sort of right sizing the coverage, give us a little more color on what you mean there.
That we definitely want to make sure you're not overinsured, but we want to make sure also that you're not underinsured. That oftentimes we'll see folks that don't have the right amount of coverage on their homeowners, or they don't really realize they have, accumulated the amount of jewelry or fine art that they have. So they might not have considered that as part of their program at all. From an auto perspective, do you really need full coverage on that older car? Or do you have the right amount of liability limits? And I think, from a liability perspective as well, have you considered an umbrella policy and considering, additional liability coverage? So we want to make sure that, whatever your lifestyle may be, that your coverage is kind of commensurate to that and is adequate to protect the wealth that you're really trying to create.
Cool. So you mentioned umbrella policies. So what is an umbrella policy? Does everybody need one? Who should have one?
Well, I think, if you live in any city in the US, everybody has heard the personal injury attorney commercials. And I think, the umbrella policy is probably the most often overlooked coverage, especially given what you get and the amount that it costs. So what an umbrella is a primary method that we use to protect wealth, that it may have taken years or even generations to accumulate. So it's a type of coverage that goes over and above, which is why it's kind of termed umbrella, over and above the auto and underlying property policies. So in the event that something catastrophic happens, a car accident that results in a fatality or a pool incident at your home, that the auto or property policy would respond first. And once that's exhausted, the umbrella then comes and picks up from there. So if you don't have an umbrella, that person that is injured or has suffered damage could potentially come after you personally. So that's why we definitely recommend umbrella policies. They're very affordable. They're sold in increments of millions, starting off at 1 million, and it goes up from there. Typically, we'll recommend a 1-to-1 ratio of net worth to umbrella limit. And depending on, the activity level of the insured, that if they are on nonprofit boards, if they're high profile, or they're very active in the community, or they have jet skis, water sports, things like that, we may suggest a multiple of that just because they do have more at risk and more to lose.
Now, one of the things you touched on there was a scenario where unfortunately somebody has a traffic accident and there's a big claim there. But, I imagine everybody that's watching this has looked at and gotten a copy of their bill for their auto insurance and thought, what the heck is this? It seems like every time we turn around, the premiums that we're paying for automobile insurance is going up. Can you help us understand what's going on with automobile insurance prices?
Yeah, I think historically people have often thought that, well, my car is getting older, so therefore my auto insurance premium is going to decrease. Unfortunately, that has not been what we've seen in the market for the last several years. I think if you look at really what the makeup of cars are today, that there's a lot more technology involved. There are a lot more sensors. They're all over the car. So a simple, let's say, incident that involves a bumper now could potentially involve cameras, which have associated costs. So those costs of repairs or replacing the car gets passed down to the policyholder. So that's a large part of what's driving auto insurance premiums. The other piece of it is that liability, that it doesn't take much to do several $1,000s worth of damage to someone else's car. So having to potentially pay for that, or that risk that's involved, is also being passed on to the policyholder. So those two, yes, sides of the house, the liability as well as the collision or comprehensive, both of those things are really being driven up, and that's what's causing that auto increase.
Makes a lot of sense. So now you mentioned that technology was a part of what's going on with auto insurance, and cars are getting more technologically advanced. One of the other things I think we're seeing a lot of is cyber crimes, right? And things getting hacked, and can people get into your stuff through your your devices around the house, and even potentially your automobiles. We're talking about self-driven cars. But is there a role to play from an insurance perspective around cyber crimes and any sort of liabilities that we might have there that we just sort of don't think about?
Yeah. I think technology exposures have always been a concern for businesses, but it has become a bigger topic for everyday users as free Wi-Fi is available everywhere from the airport, coffee shops, and other stores. I think especially during the pandemic, when we saw really the blurring of the lines between business and personal usage as more and more people work from home. So CEOs are more frequently using their basic home networks for sending personal emails, but also for managing accounts for their large or small businesses, or potentially sending sensitive information. So large companies have long secured cyber coverage. They've got firewalls, they've got protections. in place for that. But it is one of the fastest growing coverages for small businesses and even average individuals looking for an added sense of protection. So there are several companies that can perform diagnostics to identify really security weaknesses that you might have in terms of your hygiene and how you're using your technology. They can also, make recommendations for VPNs or virtual private networks. So you can have your own kind of encryption service in your home or attached to your phone. So it is absolutely something that's available to everyday users. So should you have a concern for hackers or people with malintent getting a hold of your information. So it's not just for businesses anymore, it's for anybody.
Now, let's switch for a moment to kind of a more mundane topic, and it's one of those things that recently came across my discussions here just a couple of days ago. So we go out of town for a graduation and talking to a family member, and there's a neighbor that's got this tree in their yard. And it's kind of like, hey, you talk to the neighbors, like, listen, man, you got to do something about that tree. You got to do something about the tree, and you're worried. So help guide us through that scenario of like, hey, there's this tree, and if a storm comes along, knocks the tree down, how do we determine who's really responsible for cleaning up the tree and any damage that might result? Who owns that particular claim in that kind of scenario?
Yeah, that's a great question, Lee. I mean, I think it's something that comes up every, kind of storm season, and we're absolutely moving into that space. So if you're fortunate enough to live in a wooded area, it's great for scenery, but it's not so great if a tree falls in your yard. So first, we recommend that you keep an eye on nearby trees and overhang to make sure that they're well maintained and dead trees and limbs are removed. But if a neighbor's tree falls in your yard, the health of the tree is going to be the first thing that's considered. So if it's visibly diseased or dead prior to it falling over, it would absolutely be the neighbor's responsibility to have it removed, and they or their insurance would cover the cost of any damage. Now, if the neighbor's tree was alive and it falls in your yard, it's considered an act of God, and you are responsible for the cost of removing the tree, and your insurance should cover any necessary repairs to your property, less your homeowner's deductible. So even though it may kind of think, or you might think, oh, well, that tree belonged to my neighbor, it's their responsibility. If it ends up in your yard and it's no fault of their own and they're not liable for it, it's actually your responsibility to take care of it.
All right. So listen, everybody, if the tree falls down and it was a perfectly healthy tree, you enjoyed how pretty it looked, don't go getting mad at your neighbor because they don't offer to pay for the tree. It's your responsibility for a healthy tree. So again, thank you for clearing that up, and hopefully we keep some neighborhoods happy with that additional bit of information. But, along these lines of storms perhaps coming through and knocking trees down, we're seeing a lot more what appear to be extreme weather events. Anywhere from the number of storms that might come through to the strength of storms that are popping up, and things that were thought to be, again, let's call them 100-year floods. Statistically speaking, they're happening, every other year, it seems like. Is there a reason to have cause for concern about the increased frequency and severity of these weather events? We're here, both of us here in Georgia, and I know that in some parts of the country it's a little more difficult, but, any cause for concern about, this increased frequency and weather events?
I think that no place is safe. That Georgia certainly is kind of in a more protected area compared to, say, Florida or California. But I think we can no longer kind of put our heads in the sand that climate change is real. It's having a significant impact on everything, risk related from the cost of property coverage to the exclusions and limitations found in policies, as well as even the availability of coverage. So over the last few years in Florida and California especially, the insurance climate has become increasingly challenging. And unfortunately, it's reached a state of crisis in those states. And it's due really to a combination of factors. So you mentioned the frequency of storms, that hurricanes are no longer kind of, maybe they'll happen this season, that from June to November, you can pretty much count on a hurricane, hitting the coast at some point. wildfires are absolutely becoming more commonplace. And they are not just in California, they are finding their way to Utah, Colorado, and other Western states. We're seeing flooding as well. We're seeing, low temperature storms that's causing a lot of burst pipes as well. So I think no place is really safe. So it's absolutely important to be aware of where you live, or be aware of where you might be thinking to live. So absolutely contact a realtor, but you may also want to contact a risk advisor to find out the availability of insurance coverage in that particular state or area or zip code. Because a lot of people can be surprised that, the insurance is the last piece of the puzzle, but really it may be a driving factor on whether that house gets purchased or not.
Gotcha. And so are there different types of coverages or add-ons that maybe you can get depending on where you are, things that people should look for?
I think definitely if you are in a hurricane-prone state or area, making sure that you do have wind coverage, making sure that your house does have additional wind mitigation measures, covering the opening protection like the doors and the windows. Understanding that there are coverages available from several premier carriers about wildfire, that they do have services that can spray a chemical over your house so that if there is any damage, it is at least reduced because it has that flame retardant covering on there. So those are just some things that I guess as a homeowner or a policyholder that you want to be aware of in terms of your choices, as well as what's available out there to you.
Cool. Good deal. Okay, so really enjoyed spending some time with you today. But let me ask you another question. So you're national sports director for Aon.
Mhm.
Are you a big sports fan? And if so, who's your favorite team or maybe favorite player? As long as that doesn't get you in any kind of trouble, I don't want a client to get a little jealous because you said somebody else is your favorite player. But are you a big sports fan? Who are some of your favorite teams?
Well, I will say growing up, I was the band geek, but
Okay,
that also means that I was at all the football games. So
gotcha.
I will absolutely have to root for the home team. Falcons season ticket holder. Nobody make fun of me because of that. I've just got to ride with the Atlanta teams. But love the
Gotcha.
Braves, love the Hawks. So yeah, I would say Atlanta teams.
Gotcha. And how are you feeling about this year's draft for the Falcons? Thumbs up, thumbs
Let's see.
down, sideways.
That's a touchy one. I think we are playing
Okay,
for the future, so I will have to support their decision to really be in a good quarterback position. So I'm
gotcha.
going to go with a thumbs up on their decision.
Okay, that'll work. That'll work. We got to plan for the future. And I will say this, as somebody that's gone through the recovery process for a ruptured Achilles tendon, you're different on the other side. And I ruptured mine at 26 versus 36. So I totally get planning for the future. So listen, it's been great being here with you today. But before we go, any final thoughts? Anything you'd like to share with our audience before we wrap things up today?
Yeah, I think I'd just really like to encourage all of the listeners and viewers to include risk management as a part of your overall wealth strategy. That the wealth creation is absolutely critical, but so is the protection of it. So, really moving that to the top or near the top of that conversation is something that I would absolutely suggest. Also, preserving insurability, not using the insurance policy as a maintenance strategy, and more so if it's going to cause a hardship to make those repairs on your own. What can you do to kind of mitigate those potential losses? And then finally, understand that all policies, carriers, and brokers are not created equally. It's not just the numbers that you see on the front page, the declaration page, but it's the words, because that's the promise to pay, and so that you know what the insurance company is obligated for should you need them.
Gotcha. Good deal. And if viewers want to get in touch with you or spoke at Aon, what's the best way to go about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So like I said, I am based here in Atlanta, but I do write in all 50 states. So the best place to reach me is email Latonya.Simmons@aon.com. I can also be found on LinkedIn. Also, from a phone perspective, please feel free to call our 1-800 number of 1-866-225-5266.
Good deal. Good deal. Again, thank you, Latonya, for being here with us today and sharing so much wisdom. And until next time, go Falcons. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Lee.